Hello and welcome to the Wardroom, a podcast dedicated to the leadership development of the U.S. Navy's engineering duty officers. I'm your host, Lieutenant Commander Matthew Horton. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Rear Admiral Scott Brown. In addition to being my boss, Admiral Brown is currently serving as the Director for Fleet Maintenance for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He is a nuclear qualified engineering duty officer with multiple nuclear propulsion operational tours and holding multiple degrees in related fields. His most recent tour, prior to serving as Director for Fleet Maintenance, was as the 107th Commanding Officer of Norfolk Naval Shipyard. So grab a cup of coffee and join us in the Wardroom. Admiral Brown, welcome to the Wardroom.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate the introduction there. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Yes, sir. Well, I understand that you'd like to talk with us about some lessons that you've learned when in mentoring others, but specifically from Admiral Stavridis' book, Command at Sea. So, Admiral, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks. Yeah, great. Thanks again for the opportunity here, team. And we really look forward to speaking to the entire EDO community on some of my thoughts. As Matthew mentioned, that I am you got a lot of nuclear experience, done a shipyard commander tour. Did a tour as Admiral Moore's EA after that, and now the Fleet Maintenance Officer in PAC Fleet. And so kind of wanted to share some of the lessons I've learned a little bit and apply those to a book called Command at Sea that I've been using for a number of years since I went through command school, which I thought really spoke to me. And it spoke to my own command philosophy going into commanding of Norfolk Naval Shipyard and then on further after that. Again, what I use to mentor mostly officers, relatively senior officers, the ones I speak to mostly now, 05s, 06s, and maybe share some things with you that you could use in your mentoring. Admiral Moore signed out a document last year, actually in 2019, that required all of us to discuss the LDF attributes of developing others in initiative, supported by strategic thinking and vision in all of our mentoring sessions and then our own personal and professional development efforts. So part of that goal there of developing others in initiative, I just kind of want to share with you the things that I've learned over the last several years. And I'll frame it in the form of this book that I think is really important for us. So the chapter I wanted to talk about in this book called Command at Sea, and this is the 6th edition, but in chapter 1 is really where I to focus my attention because it goes through a small section on the philosophy of command. And you could say, hey, I'm not going into command, I don't really need to read this, but I think it applies to all naval officers, no matter what level you are. If you're leading people, whether they're sailors or civilians, these philosophy attributes and principles apply and are very applicable to all of us. I even shared these when I was in command with my senior leadership team, which is mostly civilian GS-15 level leaders. And then here, when I got here to PAC Fleet, I shared it with my team here, which is a group of GS-14, a couple 15, some 13s as well, and some naval officers in the 04 and 05 level. So I think, again, very applicable to us. So I'll just kind of run through some of these principles here, and I'll try to tie it into the attributes that Admiral Moore laid out, and Admiral Galinas is working on the same things as well with the community. So the first one is called "Take Care of Your People," and kind of the first step as a CEO or any leader is to take care of people, and it's really I read this section of this book to understand it because I don't have time to go through all of it, but different interpretations of what that means and what this book lays out here is what that means is taking an active interest in every aspect of professional development, training, safety, advancements, messing, berthing, and recreation. That's a quote right out of the book. And it doesn't mean that everybody gets what they want and there aren't issues people, because when you got a group of people together, you're gonna have problems. People make mistakes. People have relationship issues. It's not going to be a perfect harmony environment, no matter how good of a leader you are. And so your job is to dig into those things and find where the issues are with your people to make them as best as they can to support the mission, because your ultimate goal here is the mission of your organization. Because without that, you're really you're really not leading anything. So that's kind of the first principle of this book. The next principle goes to the competence area that the CNO has laid out for us. It says, you must know your command. And the way I interpret that is you got to know your job, right? And you might go into a job, and you might not know all the aspects of it, but you got to go dig into it. You got to go walk around and look. You got to go see what your folks are doing. You got to understand, kind of all the intricacies of your organization. The only way you do that is by going out and talking to folks. You can have briefings and training sessions to know the ins and outs of if you're on a ship, the equipment of your ship, how it operates, the organizational relationships. If you're in a shipyard, it's how the shipyard operates, the issues with the infrastructure, the issues that people are having. So you got to know your command. You got to know the basics of how it works, what your business is as well. And you only get there really by continuing to learn and continuing to ask questions. The third key in this book is called your character. And it says you must be loyal, honest, and ethical in all your dealings, both private and public. It also discusses the patience associated with leadership. A lot of us leaders, have personalities where we drive for perfection, and that's good, but it can't be such a drive to perfection that you're running people ragged, or you're overly overbearing on folks. So you have to be patient with folks to go learn. You have to help develop those skill sets to get where you need to be. The fourth key to command in this book was the tone of your command, which is interesting. A lot of folks will say you can tell the tone of a ship when you step onto the quarterdeck by the way the watches behave, by the way the quarterdeck looks. As one example of a tone of command, crisp. It calls out Admiral Spruance as a master at setting the tone of a ship. Produced kind of a quiet confidence in his officers by showing that he trusted them. And he let his officers operate the ship under his watchful eye, but let them do it, and would only step in if he had to. And it resulted in a command where everybody understood what the boss wanted to do, was working towards one goal, a very crisp command. The fifth principle of this book is communications, which I think we struggle with, and I know I struggled with this in a command of 10,000 people. How do you communicate, get the communications from the folks so that you understand what their issues are, but how do you also communicate your vision and the vision of the shipyard, for example, in my case, so that we're all rowing in the same direction? Very challenging. You have different folks with different goals and sometimes different agendas, and you have to kind of understand where you need to go, communicate that, and then you got to keep focusing on it. The next principle here, this is the sixth principle, is called boldness, and I'll tie this to the initiative direction attribute of the LDF that ComNavC signed out. Boldness. So it's not recklessness, but it's boldness to drive ahead. And I kind of want to center on this one because I think our community could use a discussion on this attribute, because again, back with initiative and boldness, it was called out by ComNavC to go focus on because of the community assessment that was provided with feedback from the community, and by my own kind of career development and my own career experiences has led me to believe that this is a key attribute for us and something that we need to work on in our community. And what I mean by initiative is, I'll use Admiral Aquilino here at Pac Fleet. One of his principles is you got to know what your boss needs to be successful. And if you know what your boss needs to be successful, you can get in front of that and feed your boss what they need. And by making your boss successful, therefore you become successful. And so it's that understanding of what the vision is of the organization, how you are continually driving yourself there and your organization there and leaning in. It's not going to be easy. There are going to be, barriers. There's going to be constraints. There's going to be obstacles. There's going to be sometimes active resistance. But it's your job as a leader to overcome those. Sometimes knock some of those barriers down. Sometimes communicate, to your boss what the issues are to help in knocking some of those barriers down. But also instill in the confidence and boldness in your folks to drive ahead and lean in to the mission and get to the vision of your organization. So I think boldness is key, and it gives some examples in the book about William Bull Halsey, Arleigh Burke, officers that were extremely bold in combat, took some risks, and came out ahead. Just wanted to talk about that really quickly. The last one that it talks about in this book is, it really says, don't take yourself too seriously. And that's a good one, for us, because we often get so caught up in our careers and what we're doing with our organizations that we forget about the fact that this is a tough business, but it also, you need to have some balance in it, in yourself, in your life, with your family, with your own personal life, to make sure you don't burn yourself out, and then become someone that's just totally focused on business at hand and forget about some of the other things in life. But you also will you'll drive some of your folks away by continuing, just having that type of attitude where you don't really take yourself too seriously, and you don't have a good sense of humor. An example is you'll go into command. You might be in command for 2, 3, 4 years, and then it's going to be done. And so you got to have something that's in place once you're done with that part of your life. And there are other more constant parts of your life that need to be focused on. So that's kind of my leadership discussion. Matthew, any questions or you got for me after that?
I actually have a multi-part question for you today. And the first part of this one is, with an increased focus on bridging skill sets between the maintenance, modernization, and program management realms within our community, how do you see our career paths to crown jewels evolving for the various mentor groups? Or do you see the mentor groups needing to change or evolve in any way?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Matthew. I think something that we're actively working on in the community is, we've had a number of folks feedback through, whether it's surveys, verbal feedback over the years, that, hey, our community needs to work on this cross-pollination. So we got mentor groups that we've established, and those mentor groups are kind of centered around technical skill sets, program management, you've got maintenance, you've got other aspects of, whether it's the combat systems folks, whether you've got, weapons development and things like that. So our community is kind of centered up on these silos of professional, competence. And I think the critique of that is that how do we go through these silos and develop into senior leaders, how are we getting more broad experience, but also how are we developing the character traits that are necessary for success at senior leadership levels? And how are we getting a more of a, like I said, a broader experience of the community, so that when you reach to a point where you're not just focused on your widget or your shipyard. Now you're focused on the overall NAVC and or Navy fleet's needs, and the Navy and the military's needs, right? How do you develop that knowledge and competence and character to do that? So I think the community is leaning towards more broadening and focusing on leadership traits. For example, when we decide we're going to say pick a CO for a certain position, or we just focus on their individual experiences they've had or the jobs they've had in the past, or are we looking at that individual that's being selected as with certain leadership principles in mind, so that when I go to a CO's job selection board, that team is looking at a number of traits that aren't necessarily geared towards, the specific, technical knowledge that individual has, but has a better idea of the broadening aspects. And that in itself, that selection process, my hope is that'll help drive us to, improve development of some of those leadership principles, throughout. So if I'm going up for a board and I'm seeing that, these things are required in a more broad-based leadership, principle-based things, then I'm going to be inclined to go work on that stuff. And so that's kind of the idea here. It's not to say that we're not doing a good job of that now, but it's just a continual improvement idea, to improve our broadening at the senior leadership levels. Does that answer your question, Matthew?
Well, I think so, but I also want to open that up a little bit. As we tie that back to our targeted attributes that you've already mentioned, specifically developing others. How do you see that? I can see that as, as an individual, what I would need to go to, but what do you see as developing others and helping to foster this bridging of skill sets, particularly as we look maybe towards the more junior members of our community?
Yeah, so I'll say developing others. So if we're looking at the character and competence and relationship building aspects of the leadership development framework, right? What are we focused on in our discussions? And it's not just in our mentoring discussions, right? We're talking formal mentoring or informal mentoring. It's the day-to-day behavior of the leader. All right. So for myself, how am I behaving day to day to influence the development of the folks that are working on my team? It's not just the go into the room and talk about your career, and then you maybe have a side conversation on some stuff. Yeah, that's good, but I think the more important part of this is the daily interactions and the daily behaviors that we have. How are we engaged in the community, development to encourage, these types of daily behaviors that are influencing the culture of the organization to develop, and not just purely, dedicated towards these mentoring sessions. I put an hour mentoring session on my calendar, and then I check the box. That's my mentoring for the day. Now I can go on doing what I've always been doing. Right. So I'm trying to get out of that mindset where we're going to try to influence the daily behaviors. I think the way we do that is maybe a more concerted effort of what are some of these principles we're driving to, more understanding, more learning in that respect. You kind of go through the things I talked about, from the book, right? Are those things typical topics of conversation in training sessions? Are they being considered by senior leaders in their day-to-day business? Because they know that their behavior is influencing those that work for them and those they interact with, and they are in the course of those interactions, they are in fact developing others, and actually that development is actually, I would say, more impactful than the sit-down mentoring sessions.
No, sir, that's good information. Thank you. And hopefully we can continue to work to implement that as we go about our daily lives and jobs within the community. So, Admiral, last question for you. We always try and get one every time we have a guest. Do you have any good book recommendations for us?
Yes, I do. Well, I mentioned one of them, right? So the first chapter is good. The rest of it, if you're going to sea, yeah, it's probably good stuff. But I think the first chapter is the one I would focus on, and I've got some copies of that I've shared. But the book I want to mention is this book called Boys in the Boat. I don't know if you read this, Matthew, but
I have.
it's okay. Good. It's a great book. So my son, we moved to Arlington, for 10 months after command at Norfolk. My son got into crew up there, and I wanted to learn, what it's all about. And it's really an interesting culture in crew, right? It's kind of taking you back to the old school days of hard nosed work, to the point of almost self brutality. It seems like if you're just continually beating yourself up to get there. And this book, I wanted to go learn about it. And this book was about the University of Washington boys or men's crew team, and the fact that they were kind of a ragtag group of boys when they came into college, and developed into a group of men that went on to win the Olympics. I think it was 1936 in front of Adolf Hitler over the German team who was favored. And so it's just a great book of teamwork and how when you're on a crew team, everybody's got to work together. They have to all be in sync. And we often use the analogy of rowing in the same direction, right? And you literally had to do that. And they talked about the point where you're in sync and your boat almost just seems to glide over the water effortlessly. The men that are rowing are so synced on each other that they've kind of lost, themselves in that. Now they just become like almost one person, rowing this boat. And I thought that was a really good book for what we try to do in leadership. I just really I recommend it. I think it's really inspiring and really good. I think there's a couple of documentaries out there too, if you want to go look at those. But the book's incredible. I also listened to it on audio. The book on audio. We used to call them books on tape. But the book's on audio now, and listen to that. There's a good version on there as well. I think it was Apple Books that I got it on.
Well, thank you for that recommendation, Admiral. Yeah, it's a great book. I really enjoy it. There's a lot of really great stories of heroism and hard work, kind of centered around that 1936 Olympic Games. But definitely, and I probably want to pull it back off the shelf and maybe kind of read through it again. But Admiral, thank you again for joining us today. We hope to have you back soon. And aloha, since we're out here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you again.
Okay, you bet. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining us in the wardroom. Special thanks to our sound engineer, Lieutenant Andrew Rowley. If you have questions you would like our guest to answer, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at thewardroompodcast@gmail.com or tweet or follow us on Twitter @wardroompodcast. Join us next time when we will be joined by Vice Admiral John Hill, Director of the Missile Defense Agency. We look forward to meeting again in the wardroom.